Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Suzanne Hug, running for Congress. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. You know, I was talking to some professional political consultants, just trading notes on who's running. And I asked one of them, I said, well, who of all the kind of humanity forward endorsed candidates, you know, who do you think's actually got a shot? And one of the people said, oh, you know, there's this woman in Arizona, Suzanne Hug, who I don't think enough people are paying attention to, and you should keep an eye on her. And so then I said, okay, sounds good. And then I reached out, and I'm so glad that you agreed to come into to the Nerd Zone for a chat. How are you doing?
Good. Let me step it back one. So I'm actually not running for Congress at the like state, what is it?
Federal.
At the national level,
Right.
I'm running for the Arizona House at the state level. And Arizona is incredibly important this year because we only need 2 of these seats to actually flip the legislature blue here in the state. So just like Virginia did in 2019, that's what we're looking to do here in Arizona. So 2 seats in the House, 3 seats in the Senate, and then the Democrats will have control for the first time in decades.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I actually think that's why the consultant was so bullish on your race, not only because of the impact on the state, but also running for the state house requires a little bit less capital than running for the U.S. House. And it's not uncommon for people to work in state legislature, and then they have a bright future beyond that as well. So tell us a little bit, Suzanne, about who you are and who you were before you decided to run for the House.
Absolutely. So I'm biracial. My father's side is Japanese American. My mother's side is Italian American. Both of our families came over in the late 1800s, so before the Exclusion Acts, and came here and were hardworking people. My mother's side is in labor unions and worked in factories. My grandfather organized for the Teamsters, right alongside Jimmy and Joe Hoffa back on the East Coast, right? So like Connecticut, New York area. And on my father's side, we settled in Seattle and were farmers. And that's where he was born until, of course, World War II happened and the internment camps. And for anyone who doesn't know, all of the Japanese American people, citizens and non-citizens, were swept up along the entire Western United States. Never charged with anything. There has actually never been shown that there was anybody who did anything wrong. But they took 120,000 people because we looked the wrong way, put us into internment camps. We lost all of our property. The only thing you could take was what you could carry. My father was 3 years old when that happened. I mean, his dad had him taking him to the zoo, and they were looking at the bears when they found out about Pearl Harbor. It was something that seemed so removed. And I know right now we're experiencing as a country all of these events, and sometimes they feel removed from us, but they can have very real world consequences for our daily lives. So growing up with that family history, I made pilgrimages, I've seen the internment sites. And here in Arizona, that line actually ran straight through the middle of Phoenix. A lot of people don't know this, but if you lived on one side, you had to go to the camps. And on the other side, you could stay in your homes and keep your businesses. It was that arbitrary. So our family was swept up in that, and there are stories, but I will leave those for another day. But regardless to say, it certainly left an impression and a trauma and a terrible grievance that had to be righted. So growing up, I actually grew up in what I would call an activist household. So even though my father is a sheriff's deputy, he'd served in the army, he loved this country, he also knew that we had to own up to our mistakes. And he was writing letters, he was organizing our neighbors and our family and our friends. And so I learned that being involved doesn't mean you're against our country. It means that that's how you are a patriot. That's how you make us better as a whole. So that was up in Salt Lake City, Utah. I ended up coming to Arizona for school. I got my degree in economics from Arizona State. Go Sun Devils. And that's also where I met my husband. So we fell in love, got married, and 15 years later now, we have 2 little boys. I worked in insurance for a long time, doing risk analysis, data management, also mentorship and helping people, but really customer service. And I got to talk to people from all across the country. And it taught me to listen. And I think in a legislature or any kind of leader, you really need somebody who knows how to listen, who can hear not what you're saying, but what your real needs are. And that's a skill that I developed, but it's also a caring and an ethics that I carry with me every day. 3 years ago, my husband and I actually opened up our own store. So if you want to talk about nerds, I own a game store. That is my livelihood.
Literally a gaming
We're
store.
not talking about video games. We were talking
Yeah.
about like Dungeons and Dragons,
Oh,
and
yeah.
Magic the Gathering, and Pokemon cards, and board games. That is what I do. And it keeps me connected. I see people of all classes, of all types coming in and talking to me about what's going on in their lives. And I said, I got to run. I got to run. Knocking on doors isn't enough for me. Donating isn't enough for me, although I appreciate both of those things. Volunteers and donations make the world go round. But I needed to step up, and I knew that my story was important and that I had the privilege and the moment in my life where I could make that leap into public office.
What were you hearing when you were in the store? Was it one of those stores like I've seen some gaming stores where they have like little like figurines and people are like painting them and it's like this another world, like this little micro community. That's awesome.
Yes, we have Warhammer and Games Workshop as well.
Yeah.
Lots
That's
of
awesome.
miniatures. We've got tables where people, in the before times used to play.
Right. Yeah. It was almost like a little nerd bar, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're a geek gathering place.
Yeah, love it. So what were you hearing people talk about that made you feel like you had to get more involved? Are there specific kind of problems that Arizona in particular is facing, or was it just these sort of national themes that were concerning people?
The very first day we opened, right, we're super excited. It's our grand opening. We did a soft open for our friends and our family. And in the morning, I'd gone out and I'd gotten donut holes because who doesn't love donuts? Right. And I got like a lot of the munchkins from Dunkin' Donuts.
Of
You ever
course.
got the big box, right? So I got the glazed, I got the chocolate, but I got the blueberry ones too, which are a personal favorite. And I brought all of these donut holes and I put them on this like big platter. And by the time our doors actually opened, my husband had eaten all of the blueberry ones. He was very upset. And our friends and our families started coming in. But there was a woman and her son who was sitting outside. And we're also located right next to a Goodwill. And at first I was like, oh, maybe they're waiting for a ride or something. And as the day went on and we're welcoming people and chatting, I kept seeing them out there. And there's a point where I realized that they were homeless. That they were there because they were shaded during the day. And it was such a juxtaposition because her son, the little boy sitting outside, was about the same age as my kids, who were inside, stuffing their face full of donut holes. So I ended up inviting them in, giving them some bottled water, and the little boy, I let him sit back there with my kids. And I came back a little while later and asked how they were doing. And he said, well, your son has eaten 11 donut holes. I said, that sounds about right. And your other son, he's had 5. I said, okay. He's like, is it okay if I have one? Like, yes, this is why I said you're here. But the fact that he had sat there and counted every single one, it was just heartbreaking to me. to be in a moment of celebration, right, of success and excitement and having a vision for the future, and at the same time to be living in the same community, the same space as people who don't have that kind of hope. For them, a donut hole is a big deal. That was one of those moments that has moved me and that I keep with me, that we need to do better for everybody in our community.
What do you think we could do to help reduce the frequency of that story happening in the future?
It's one of the reasons I think a universal basic income needs to happen. It needs to happen so that little boy's mother, her name was Annette, I remember, that she could have somewhere to be, that they could have a safe room, and good food. I believe in Andrew Yang's idea of eradicating poverty. And I think universal basic income is the way to do it. My degree from Arizona State is in economics. And I look at the stuff. I've been following it, universal basic income trials in different states, right, in Africa and in Europe for a while. And they have so much promise. And the math is good. Because what I've seen during COVID as a store owner, right, is that people want to shop locally. But gig work is down 60% with revenue. They just don't have the cash in their hands. And if we could get cash back into flow, right? Money is currency for a reason. If it's just sitting in a big bank account, it's not doing anybody any good. It needs to flow so that we can have a stronger economy. And universal basic income is a fantastic vehicle to do that.
So as a student of economics, I suspect you've heard the counter argument, which is if society has or the government has revenues, that it should be allocated in the form of tax relief to job creators or high income entrepreneurs who will then spend that money and create sustainable employment for everyone else. What's your take on that argument?
Well, that's what we've been trying for the past 100 years. And we have the greatest wealth inequality since then. So clearly it's not working. One of those where I look at the data, I look at the numbers, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been giving huge tax breaks to big corporations, but they're not creating jobs. What they're doing is they're moving toward automation. And automation is smart. Like, I get it. I use automation even in my little business. We have a card scanner, right? So that we don't have to manually input things. But I'm also a job creator. I hire veterans and, I give people a chance. And I know that if they had another $1,000 a month, they'd worry less. And honestly, they'd even be better employees. Having that confidence lets you go into work more. It lets you stay focused and do a better job. And frankly, Amazon is going to continue automating no matter what, whether or not we get UBI. So let's start taxing some of those automation dividends and getting them into the hands of Americans.
So, you mentioned the wealth inequality. Here's an interesting chart. I know everybody kind of feels like wealth inequality is an issue, but the numbers also bear it out. If you look here on the x-axis, it starts around 1989. Actually, the bottom 90% owned about a third of the wealth in the country. And now it's probably closer to less than a quarter. And then you see the top 1% previously having about 30% of the wealth, and now almost 40%. And so to your point, it is trending kind of in the wrong direction. I know there was an argument that, if you give the top 1% more resources, it'll trickle down and the bottom 90% will be better off. And I think in fairness to some of those kind of conservatives, they would probably argue, yes, the bottom 90% own less, but they do have more purchasing power, or they have a slightly better quality of life than they did 30 years ago. But they're just not I would argue they're not participating in the upside nearly as much.
I mean, really, American workers haven't gotten a raise in over 40 years.
Yeah.
When you look at real wages.
Yeah, the median income, like the inflation adjusted median income over time.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I actually have a town hall I'm doing later today with another small business owner. And we're talking about how really, basic income just creates a floor. That's all it's doing. Like on that graph,
Mm-hmm.
all we're doing is creating a floor so that we don't have people starving in the streets. Right. And that's good for public safety and public health. And that's good for business. Right. People talk about, blighted neighborhoods. People talk about, oh, I have to keep finding and catering to these fewer and fewer customers who actually have disposable income.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not good for innovation and entrepreneurship. That's not good for being able to start up your own business in a smaller size city. So this really spreads out the availability for opportunity in our country. And I think if you talk to any conservative, right, if you want to have a chance to build your own business, to stand on your own 2 feet, you've got to have that opportunity. That's why we're called the land of opportunity. But we have to have a response to the changing economy, the fourth industrial revolution. We have to have a response to that to just create a playing field, let alone a level one. And that's what I'm afraid of, is that we're just going to see so many people falling through the cracks that we're not going to have an economy with enough people participating to continue growing.
What is your take on the COVID kind of stimulus investments? A lot of that also went to like United Airlines and other corporations. Not as much went to direct kind of cash relief. Sounds like you would advocate for more benefits straight to the citizens, or what's your view on that?
I mean, we definitely need to do a second round of direct stimulus. I don't even think that's a question at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But really, so as a small business owner, I applied for and I received one of the PPP loans.
Mm-hmm.
Because I hire workers. And if I had a bunch of cousins, though, who lived in the area, I would probably have a family staffed business. And a lot of Asian business owners, Latino business owners, a lot of minority communities, that's how we start and run our businesses. Right? My husband and I both work behind the counter. We don't necessarily take a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just how well the business does helps to pay our expenses. And so the PPP loans were really designed for what I call a W-2 environment, right? Somebody who has paid and hired staff. But that doesn't take into account the thousands and thousands of family-owned and operated businesses that don't function on that model. And so to me, it was actually a very discriminatory way that it was set up. Mm-hmm. Because it wasn't taking into account the way our small businesses actually, and the small businesses that you and I think of when we're talking small businesses, right? The family shop, the bodega
right
on the corner. We're not talking about the Ruth Chris Steakhouse franchise chains.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't take into account how those businesses run. But I think it shows you the perspective of the people who are currently in leadership.
Yeah, and I think that probably applies to both parties. I feel like if you here's a fun chart for a fellow economics student, the anatomy of the CARES Act. Mm-hmm. So out of the 2 trillion, 300 billion was direct cash support, and then another 260 for unemployment. And then you've got the small business 350, but the airline industry alone got 58 billion, and large corporations in total got 500 billion, $500 billion. And then you got state and local and public. So the percent that actually went to direct cash payments is about 15% of that $2 trillion bill. What do you hear from your constituents when you talk to them about stuff like basic income? I mean, I know we're here on YouTube, on social media. We know who Andrew Yang is. We've heard the arguments. We've read the studies. But folks like you probably represent a small percentage of the voting public in terms of basic income awareness. What are you hearing out there when you talk to potential voters about this stuff?
People are curious. But I'll tell you, if actually you go back to that chart
Sure.
and you scroll down to the bottom, the government
Mm-hmm.
services.
Yep. One
What
second.
I'm hearing from is that in those public services down there that are getting tiny amounts are our schools
Mm-hmm.
and our food assistance for our families.
Yeah, 13 billion for K through 12, which
Mhm.
is for all K through 12, which is about
Nationwide.
about one
That is
quarter.
not.
Yeah, nationwide, which is 1/4 of what the airlines got.
But it's tiny. And they're
Yeah.
told there's not enough for schools. But how much do schools impact our communities right now? I mean, all the time, but right now with the focus on it. How
Yeah.
much is keeping kids safe, making sure that teachers have protective equipment, that classrooms have ventilation? How much does that matter right now to getting our economy up and going versus those airlines? How much does that matter? We know, so in my area, my district here in East Mesa, Mesa is the 35th largest city in the United States. And a lot of people don't even know it's not part of Phoenix. So like we're larger than Tampa or Atlanta.
Mm.
Right.
Wow.
And yes, like we are a very large city that's next to Phoenix. And my district that I'm running for here at the state level is about half of Mesa. So yes, it's a legislative race, but it actually covers a whole lot of people. I've got about about 500,000 people here.
Wow. That's huge. So what would you do, Suzanne, if you got into the House? Like, what would you focus on?
So the first thing I want to do is get money to those schools. Because basic income is something we're going to have to explain and trial and test, and I want to work toward that. And I think it's important to have that conversation with new people. But the first thing we have to do is get money into those schools, because that's taking care of our kids, a lot of labor, right? Teachers and staff and support, that's a lot of jobs in our economy. And it's also an area for social services, for food distribution. The schools are making sure families have internet right now, right? How critical is that for everything? They're making sure that some of that CARES money that actually went to our city, the city decided the schools needed more and gave part of it so students could have laptops. Just basic connection issues.
Mm-hmm.
And we're probably about 70% suburban, 30% rural in my area. So there are still students, even in a fairly large city, that are having connection issues. That's what I want to solve first, is we got to get public health under control. I think we do that by supporting our schools, making sure our families are safe, and that we've got protective equipment for our local hospitals, for our doctors and nurses. Yeah, so universal basic income is our big solution. But for the right now, like what should the CARES Act have focused on? Schools and hospitals and communities. And that's what people are talking to me about right now. Are my kids safe? I have 2 kids who learn from home, so I'm like campaigning and momming and businessing. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. And I know that my setup is better than a lot of other people's.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine, asking him how he's holding up and how his family's doing. And he was, commenting how for him, things are pretty okay. Part of the reason is, he lives in a huge house where each of the kids has their own room, their own brand new, MacBook Pro. He's got the maximum bandwidth plan from, Xfinity. And, they go to a private school with great kind of remote education. And we were talking about how lucky we are to be able to provide those things to our kids, and how incredibly hard it must be if you lived in a household maybe that doesn't have broadband or doesn't have the highest broadband plan, maybe doesn't have these brand new fancy laptops, and maybe doesn't have a separate room for each person, which probably describes a lot of people in the country who normally could send their kids to a public school and not have to worry about that stuff. But now, we don't have that option available. So I agree with you. It's interesting how a lot of people are eager to reopen the schools, but I think if we can't do that in a safe way, then what's our plan to make remote learning sustainable and accessible for more families? Because I suspect there's probably a lot that are getting left behind, right?
Absolutely. And even just to make our school buildings safer. Like, I want to get the kids back in school, but we got to fix ventilation. I did a kind of a public health event with the epidemiologist, Dr. Eric Fangolding. If you haven't talked to him, he's amazing.
Oh, okay. I'll have to add him to the list. Yeah.
He is very active on Twitter.
Okay.
And he's putting the information out there. And it's basically, since this virus is in the air, you have to fix ventilation. Because 6 feet or 12 feet isn't going to matter when the air conditioning is swirling everything around. Right. And so, doing the tape marks on the ground, if you're outside not wearing a mask, that's helpful. But indoors, it's not making a whole lot of difference. There's a certain amount of health theater that we're being subjected to right now, like the temperature readings. It's basically health theater, because we know that you can have a perfectly normal temperature and still be contagious. Right?
Yeah.
So how much is being done that just makes you feel better, but isn't actually addressing the solutions? Because the real solutions, like fixing our ventilation and getting in really good MERV filters and UV filters and that kind of stuff, costs money. And I'll tell you, our local movie theaters are putting it in, but our schools aren't.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a little bit of window dressing where you put a little hand sanitizer at the front door and a little sign in the window and assume that, you're all good. But I was actually just reading a news report last night about confirmed cases of airline travel where people sitting multiple seats apart in business class, where, we're still contracting the virus because it is airborne. And if you're in recirculated air, it certainly makes it a much more dangerous place. So sending people back into a school that wasn't really set up for airborne virus transmission the way we're observing now, it does seem, not super responsible. Are you seeing Arizona schools? Are they getting...
Oh, you froze me for just a minute there. But I'll go ahead and answer. I think the question you were asking was about infection rates.
Yeah, and how much do you think your schools need versus what they're getting to be ready for a long sustained period of in-person education with the virus floating around?
So we just went back to school on Monday, the 14th. And we already have 3 confirmed cases in the high school that's up the street from me. It's so fast. I'm at the point where looking at our school budget. So if you look at what Arizona gives to our schools versus other states, we're actually between 48th to 51st in the union.
Ooh.
So we need to double. We need to double our school budget. We're at about 4.5 billion right now. We need to be at 9 to 10. And that's going to give us the money to do the infrastructure to get those kind of filters in and set up our classrooms.
So a lot of people probably, when they hear that, are thinking, well, how are you going to pay for it? Are you thinking of redirecting funds from existing programs, or taking on debt, or raising revenue in other ways? How would you pay for that stuff?
I mean, that's the thing. We got to look at it all. That's all of the sources are on the table for me. Because we got to see, what's going to protect public health. That's number one, because if we don't have public health, we don't have an economy, right? As a business owner, I require masks because that's how we stay open, right? If people go maskless and there's big stuff and we get lockdowns again, I'm shut again.
Yeah.
Right? We were shut for a month. That hurt. I know there are other businesses that have been shut a lot longer, and I can't even imagine. So to me, it's like you get the public health under control so that you can start to rebuild the economy. And schools are a major source of either for better or worse public health.
Well, I noticed, Suzanne, that Andrew had some nice things to say about you on the Humanity Forward site. He said that you and your husband Patrick are small business owners, but moreover, that you're a proud member of the Arizona Yang Gang, and a platform built around funding schools and building a sustainable economy. Tell us a little bit more about your kind of connection to the Yang movement. When did it start, and then what was it like, kind of working with the Humanity Forward and getting their endorsement?
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny. I like to journal like once a week, and I looked back, and a year ago I had just put in my journal, Andrew Yang is rising in the polls, and it gives me a lot of hope. And I was like, oh yeah. I actually got yanged when I was out getting petition signatures for my own campaign. And I met a gentleman at the library. His name is Anthony, and he was coming out, and he's like, "Okay, so what's this petition for?" Right? Like they're always for something random. And I'm like, "Well, I'm actually the candidate running for office." And we started talking, and he told me about Andrew Yang. He said, "You really need to look into him. You've got to read his book, and I'll sign your petition." And I'm like, "All right, I'll make that deal because this sounds really interesting." So that's when I first started looking into Andrew, and that must have been April or May last year.
Yeah.
So it's been quite a while. And I mean, reading the book was a confirmation of the things that I had been thinking and seeing. But then he moves into solutions, and they were downright impressive. And there were both solutions for the immediate and for the future. And I said, this is somebody I can get behind, because he's not just taking a slightly different position on the same issues we've been talking about for the past 50 or 100 years. But this is real innovation, forward thinking, and the big structural change that is going to help sustain us as people moving into this new internet age. So I was so impressed with that, and started following him, donating to him, and became the Mesa lead for the Yang Gang state level. So that's how I got into it, and kind of never looked back. I had to be a little bit quieter about my support because of my own candidacy.
Sure.
And I very much, just like Andrew, endorsed Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, who I'm very excited about. I putting my 100% effort behind them. But really getting to learn about Andrew, and also seeing how hands-on he was. It's not a front. The person he is on a podcast or a show is the exact person that he is. And so when they opened up endorsements for local candidates, I was actually the very first one to apply, because I was working with the crew that was like, "Oh, hey, we've started to do this."
Yeah.
They're like, "But you have to go through. You have to do the application. We have to see where your policies are at, because we already know you're with us." And it's a multi-step process, but the last one is a conversation with Andrew, and he really gets to know every single person he endorses. So that was the first time I'd gotten to really have a conversation with him, and we got to talk about backgrounds and a little bit about gaming, because we both play Dungeons and Dragons, but just a sense of where do we feel like we're at as people, where do we want to head. And our vision was already aligned, so that was an easy fit for an endorsement.
Yeah, well, congratulations on being one of the first people to get an endorsement. You mentioned some of the current events, and obviously we have a presidential election coming up. I mean, I'd love to kind of get your thoughts. Where do I begin? There's so much going on right now. Let's talk a little bit about, the notorious RBG. Her passing, I think a lot of us knew, her health was not good, and we were hoping she would kind of hang on for a little bit longer. What's your take on what the country should do about her spot? I'm actually ambivalent on this one, because I actually do feel like, the president is the president until, January of next year, and he should be allowed to kind of exercise his authorities, and same with the Senate. On the other hand, I also remember very clearly all the arguments made about Garland, and how there's no way a president could nominate someone in the final year of their term. What do you think we should do as a country?
I think first we should take a moment to really reflect on the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She was a phenomenal woman who broke so many barriers by being herself, and of role models, of people who just show me how much personal power you have when you're willing to stand up and speak your truth, and especially speak truth to power. I mean, she is a luminary of our time. So taking a moment to reflect on that, we just lost John Lewis recently as well,
Yeah.
who was a phenomenal civil rights leader. And, he marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with Martin Luther King Jr. And then he recreated that march at a Comic-Con with kids. He brought forward that legacy. And so when I think about RBG, I think about her legacy. And I know that some of her last wishes were that the seat not be filled until after the election. And with, less than 2 months to go, I believe we should fulfill her wishes. I think that is an appropriate testament to who she was, for all of the service that she gave our country for so many years, that we at least wait until after the election, because then we'll see what the election results are, right? And if Trump earns another term, then that's what we have. And if there's a change, then we need to respect that change. Here in Arizona, our Senate race is especially interesting because it's a special election, and a lot of people don't realize that. The current Senator, Martha McSally from Arizona, is appointed. She has never been elected. She actually lost her senatorial race and then got appointed to John McCain's seat. So we only have one elected senator right now, and that's Kristen Sinema. Because this is a special election, Mark Kelly could actually be sworn in directly after November 3rd. So I would at least like to wait and see how that election comes out, because that's a temporary placeholder in the Senate. And for something this important, we shouldn't have a temporary placeholder casting that vote.
You talk about the Arizona national elections or federal kind of races. And I had Mike Madrid from the Lincoln Project on a few weeks ago, and he was predicting that Arizona would be a crucial battleground state that may go in the way of Biden, but it would be a really hard fought battle. What are you seeing on the ground there? Do you feel like the Trump base is holding up, and that people will still pull the lever for him, who might have done so last time?
So I'm actually in Maricopa County, which is the 4th largest county in the United States. We are huge. So the way my county goes is the way Arizona generally goes. And if anybody would like to donate to my campaign, HugforHouse.com, because what we're doing is the on-the-ground work to help inform and motivate voters. And that's what this state is coming down to, is every local race matters. Every single one. Because there isn't a lot of enthusiasm for that national level. I think especially with the Electoral College, people feel very disenfranchised. And while I think it's so important to vote at that national level, what we're seeing is that our state senator race is critical. We have several congressional races that are also looking like they could tip. There's another Asian American woman, Dr. Harel Tiperneni, who's running in a neighboring district to mine. She is running for Congress against a gentleman who was just indicted on 11 charges of campaign fraud locally. Or I don't know if indicted is the right word, but basically there's a lot of campaign fraud, and that's a razor thin, really close race. So we have a county attorney race that's going to make a big difference in what our incarceration rates look like and what kind of sentencing people get for non-violent, maybe marijuana-related crimes. We also have marijuana on the ballot for recreational to be legalized. So Arizona nationally absolutely could tip the presidential election. And I think the way that happens is through these local races and local initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the latest polls in Arizona, it's just a few points difference between Biden and Trump beat Hillary last time by 3.5 points, so it was always close. Why do you think it is so close? I feel, and this is, you know, I know a lot of Democrats and Biden supporters are kind of scratching their heads because it feels like every time I read the news, there's another crazy kind of leak or admission or recording or kind of weird decision coming out of the White House that to me is like, well, clearly, come on, like this guy is not up for the job. Yet, you know, he's only a couple points behind in Arizona right now. Why do you think people in your district are, you know, probably almost half of them or some portion of them are supporting Trump? Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I actually had a Biden-Harris sign in front of my yard, like right next to my front door, because that's, you know, I have my little yard sign garden.
Sure.
And somebody came up and stole it. Was it 2 days ago? Somebody stole my yard sign. And I have video of this because as a candidate, that's smart. And it was a kind of a skinny Caucasian male wearing a black cowboy hat and blue jeans. And he had a car drop him off. He ran up my driveway, basically to my front door, stole my sign, and then ran through my yard, like across my landscaping, to this car that then he jumped in and they sped off. And yes, of course, I filed a police report. But I also know that this has got to be somebody who like lives on my street or drives on it. This is one of my neighbors. And I see the Trump flags flying. And I feel like Trump has done a phenomenal job of creating a community. He really has. That we've got the Yang Gang, he calls his supporters patriots. I actually get Trump's emails because I think it's really important to read the information that's coming out. And he's, you know, saying that there's these 700 times matches, but he always says, I'm relying on you. I need you. And I think he does a really good job of speaking directly to people. And people right now are scared, and he gives them something to be afraid of. And people right now want security and strength, and he projects an image. Now, I don't think that the things he says we should be scared of either are real or something that is his solutions are the right way to handle them. And like you said, if you're objectively watching him, he's clearly not fit for the job. But if you're getting his emails and you follow him and you're in those groups on social media, I understand how they've created this kind of iconic person, and they feel secure in that tribe, that community that's been created around that. And once you're in a community like that, I think it's very, very hard to rebel. It's hard to step back from what all your friends are doing. It's, you know, it really takes a lot of personal reflection. And with all the crises and all the trauma going on, I don't know that people are really capable of that right now.
One thing that you mentioned, Suzanne, was your family, one side of your family experienced the tragedy of internment camps. And now I watch the news and I hear the president talk about a vote for Biden is a vote for China, and this is the Kung flu. And Navarro was saying, you know, the Chinese unleashed this upon us as an attack. And I worry a little bit that Asian Americans are kind of being put in a category that's kind of a blurred line. Are you concerned about that? I mean, your family kind of went through it. Luckily, my family didn't come to this country till the 70s, so we didn't have to deal with the internment or the Exclusion Act. But how big of a risk do you think this is in terms of Asian American kind of relations and race relations in the country right now?
We should absolutely be concerned. I just saw a statistic that 25% of young Asian Americans have been subjected to racism during the Trump era. A quarter of our youth have had racist comments or actions happen to them. I know that we're trying to collect reports of racism and incidents, but there was that family, that young, who had a toddler that was attacked with a knife at Costco. People are being told to go back to their country when it's like, we're born and raised here. I'm fourth generation. It's really, really horrifying. And to have somebody in power, not only accepting, but leading that kind of racism is unacceptable. There's a gentleman, Norman Mineta, who's a former Secretary of Transportation, who's endorsed me. And he was actually in the same camp that my father was. He was in Heart Mountain because he was also interned. And when 9/11 happened, he was part of George Bush's cabinet. And there was talk of a Muslim list, right, of finding everybody. And a Muslim roundup is not far behind that. But Secretary Mineta was able to sit down with President Bush at the time and tell him the story of what happened to us. Tell him the story of the Japanese American internment and that citizens, U.S.-born citizens, were rounded up without charges. And many of them died from exposure, lack of medical care, some of my own family included. And he was able to explain to him that that was not the way to protect our country or to unite our country. And I honestly believe if he hadn't been in that position at that moment, that we would have had a much, much darker September 12th.
Yeah, I remember I was actually quite impressed with George W. Coming out very early, kind of emphasizing that, this attack on 9/11 was by an extreme kind of group of people, and Muslim Americans are just as American as anybody else.
Yeah,
and yeah. But I definitely don't hear that kind of talk from the Donald. It seems like
who he surrounds himself with.
Yeah. It's well, hopefully. I mean, what do you think about life after Trump? Like, assume for a moment, and I know we're gonna have to work hard to make this happen, but just assume for a moment that the country decides that we're ready to kind of change the channel on Donald and get Biden and Harris in there. How do we heal this country? Because it's not like overnight, Trump loses all of those people that have been really amped up, that are stealing your yard signs or chanting all kinds of kind of hateful things. It's not like they just fall in line, right? Like they've been kind of empowered, enabled, and stoked up. How do you think we get through this?
Well, and I think that they have a lot of legitimate critiques and concerns of our government, of our society, and of our system. I don't think Trump is the right direction. He's not the demagogue we need right now. But are people hurting? Absolutely. Does our economy have problems and inequities? Yes. And I honestly think bringing in good policy as quickly as possible is the way we do that. I saw a clip of Kamala Harris speaking about Latino issues the other day. She said, well, how are we going to get the Latino votes? She said, well, we're going to earn it. We're going to work on healthcare. We're going to work on education. We're going to do the things that help everybody in our communities to actually address those root pains that are causing people to act out in this way. And I would say at the local level, that's got to be the same answer. We've got to earn the trust. We have to earn the peace. And we do that by actually fixing the problems.
And so do you think in your case, the focus on public health, safety of schools, I mean, I could see some, I have, for viewers of this channel, you guys know, I have members of my family who are hardcore Trump supporters. And if I talk to them about the importance of investing in public health and safety, they would say, "Oh, you're just playing in to this politicizing of a health issue, and that number one, it's not as bad as the fake news is making it out to be. I mean, I've had members of my family even tell me like, oh, I read somewhere that masks can be dangerous. And they're getting this from the Trump world, maybe not directly from the White House, but it's clear that there's been a downplaying of the crisis. So I'm wondering, for these Trump supporters in your district, some of the things that you're proposing may go against kind of like core assumptions that they have. Do you feel like there's a way to break through the my team, your team kind of debate that we're in right now and really just focus on stuff that helps the community? Like, how do you break through that?
Yeah, there's a certain point of if somebody is not listening, then it doesn't matter if you're talking. Right? And the other part is you need to listen and hear what they're saying. That's that kind of customer service element of, well, what is your actual concern? Well, usually when I hear these things, what their concern is jobs. Right? The problem with the crisis is that it's costing jobs, and they want to make sure that they can afford their home and feed their family. And you know what? That's the same concern that I have, is I want to make sure that my home is safe and I can feed my family. And I think that's where we have to start. We have to start at the kitchen table. That idea of if you can break bread together, or at least talking about, let's talk about food. How do we make sure people are fed? Do you agree that we need to make sure that happens? Hey, how do we keep our streets safe? How do we keep our homes safe? How do we make sure our kids can walk to school when those schools are safe to open? Right? Can we drive on our streets? Can we fix potholes? And those are the kinds of issues that get people to really start talking to each other again. Because when you talk about stuff that is too big and too abstract, you get into those teams like you were talking about. But when you're talking about, hey, I went down to my local grocery store and I don't know which lettuce I can get because there's an E. coli recall, or I went to toilet paper and the shelves are barren, we got to fix that. That's not political. That's your neighborhood. Those are just people talking at that point. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is just reach out to people and say, hey, I'm a mom in your neighborhood and things are a mess, and let me come fix it, because that's what moms do. And I have the business experience and the background to be able to do this in a wider way for our economy.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, that politics at the local level may have the best chance to bring people together, because you're talking about real specific issues versus kind of these thematic, kind of dogmatic, us versus them kind of things that are much more kind of difficult to get consensus on. Suzanne, I know you have a hard stop and I want to be respectful of your time. Before we wrap up, are there any other topics or calls to action or things that you wanted to touch on for the audience to hear before we let you go?
Yeah, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for the good questions and for having the data ready. As a nerd myself, I love that. I'm like, ooh, charts. I'm a big fan of Excel spreadsheets and colorful pie graphs, and I really love Venn diagrams too for expressing my social frustration. So it's really nice to get to meet you, Tom, and get to talk. My campaign, we're in our last, 40 days. And if anybody's got a couple extra bucks, $10, $20, you can push it our way. At the local level for a small campaign like mine makes a huge difference. We're texting people, and if you can give me $10, that's another 100 texts I can send out. And my win number is about 60,000 voters. So that's making real progress. So please, HugforHouse.com. You can learn more about me, and you can also click the donate link. We also need volunteers to make phone calls, and you can do that from anywhere in the country. We made the decision very early on in the pandemic to go entirely virtual, because frankly, I can't say I'm a human-centered candidate and then put people at risk. I won't do it. It's nice because I'm not really a politician. I'm a business owner who's jumping into the political arena a lot like Andrew, and I'm not owned by anybody. But it also means that I need that help to be able to get my message out there, to get, so I appreciate being on platforms like this, but also just, those donations and also volunteers. If you can do a couple of hours, it's a lot of fun. We hang out on Zoom, and we also make calls. But it's getting down to the wire, and spread the word. You know, if this is your first time hearing about me, tell your friends, hey, there's this lady in Arizona and she's making waves. Because I'm determined to get into some good trouble, right? Just like John Lewis, and to uphold those legacies and to take the next step forward for all of humanity.
I love it, Suzanne. We will end with one audience question that I think is a pretty fun one from Laura Lane, who's a channel member. Thanks for your support, Laura. What's your favorite game and why?
Ooh, so right now I am loving Dungeons and Dragons because it is collaborative world building, and it helps me problem solve. And I like to play a bard, which means I also like to write like poems and occasionally haikus, limericks during battles. And so that's really a lot of fun for me, to be able to just take a step back and a breath and to laugh. And to just connect with people in a different world that doesn't require masks and have COVID.
If you had to come up with a haiku or a poem or a sentence that describes your campaign right now, how would you do it?
Ooh, I would have to think on that. But I will message it to you and you can post it.
Okay, I will post it in the comments and I'll pin it. It'll be at the top. And
I'll tweet it to you, actually. I'm at HugMesaAZ if anyone wants to follow me on Twitter.
Well, I love it. I love it. I'm looking forward to it, Suzanne, and good luck on the race. Congrats on winning your primary, by the way. So you already got some momentum. Congrats on the Yang endorsement, and hope everybody who's listening either live or sees this on replay, really considers checking out HugforHouse.com. I think you make a really good point that your dollar for a local state race goes perhaps even further than a dollar for a lot of big national campaigns, just because your margin for victory could be a few thousand votes. And that could be the difference between us getting real progress at the local level. And to your earlier point, sometimes like to heal this country, we may need to start and work from the bottom up.
Absolutely. That's how we do it. We're doing the trickle up economy.
I love it. Well, with that, we'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.